The world of Euphoria throws a lot of intense characters at us, but none are quite as terrifying and, in a twisted way, pitiable as Nate Jacobs. On the surface, he's the high school archetype turned up to a nightmarish degree, the star athlete, handsome, wealthy, and radiating a chilling, controlled aggression that he uses to dominate everyone around him. He bullies, he blackmails, he threatens with brutal physicality, and he engages in deeply unsettling psychological games, particularly with the women in his life like Maddie and Cassie. It's easy to just label him a villain and move on. But the show digs deeper, planting two potent, intertwining seeds in his backstory that force us to ask a more complex question. Is all this rage and hyper-masculine performance coming from a place of repressed homosexuality? Or is it the volcanic eruption of a childhood trauma he can never acknowledge? The truth, as is often the case with human beings, isn't a simple either-or. It's a toxic stew where both ingredients fuel each other in a vicious cycle, creating the monster we see on screen. To understand Nate, you have to start with his father, Cal Jacobs. Cal presents to the world as Nate does, a successful family man, a pillar of the community, embodying a traditional, if stern, idea of masculinity. But Nate's childhood discovery of his father's secret stash of homemade sex tapes reveals a devastating double life. Cal recorded his sexual encounters with numerous men, often younger and sometimes barely legal, in a motel room. For a young boy, stumbling onto this wasn't just about seeing his father have sex, it was a catastrophic breach of reality. The man who was teaching him how to be a man, to be tough, to dominate, to suppress vulnerability, was living a secret life that, in the toxic worldview Nate absorbs, represents the ultimate weakness and deviance. This is the foundational trauma. Nate witnesses his father's profound self-loathing and the fractured identity that comes from repressing one's true desires. This isn't just a secret, it's a live demonstration of how dangerous and chaotic hidden desires can be, and it imprints on Nate's psyche a terror of any softness, any vulnerability, any desire that falls outside a very narrow, aggressive definition of being a man. This is where the theory of repressed homosexuality enters the picture, not necessarily as a statement that Nate is definitely gay, but as a powerful lens for his behavior. Nate is utterly obsessed with his own image of hyper-masculinity. He sculpts his body to perfection. He controls his girlfriend's outfits and actions. He picks violent fights to assert dominance. This performance is so extreme, so frantic, that it reads as overcompensation, as if he's screaming his masculinity to silence any other whispers inside. His interactions with Jules, a transgender girl, are the most revealing. He is simultaneously drawn to her and repulsed by her. He catfishes her online as Tyler, engaging in intimate, vulnerable conversations he could never have in person. When he confronts her in reality, it's with rage and violence. Jules represents everything his father's tapes made him fear: fluidity, authenticity in desire, a rejection of the rigid boxes he clings to. His obsession with her isn't purely romantic or purely hateful. It's a chaotic mix of attraction, envy for her freedom, and a desperate need to destroy what he cannot understand in himself. His brutal homophobia, like the violent attack on a man who merely looks at him, is a classic symptom of internalized panic. He is trying to beat out of the world the very thing he might feel bubbling inside, the very thing he saw in his father's tapes and learned to hate. But to chalk it all up to repressed sexuality misses the profound impact of the pure, unprocessed trauma. A child's brain isn't equipped to process the cognitive dissonance of Cal's double life. The man who is supposed to be his rock, his model, is a stranger engaged in secret, shameful acts. This doesn't just confuse Nate, it shatters his entire understanding of safety, truth, and identity. The world becomes a lie. Trust becomes impossible. His rage, then, is also the rage of a betrayed and frightened child who never got to heal. He is trapped in a prison of his father's making, forced to uphold a masculine ideal that he knows, on some deep level, is a fragile facade. Every time he enforces a rule on Maddie, or controls Cassie, he is playing the role of the patriarch, the role Cal failed at, while also ensuring no one gets close enough to see the brokenness inside him, the way he saw his father's. His violence is a preemptive strike against ever being made to feel that vulnerable, that betrayed, ever again. He hurts others before they can uncover his secret, which is really his father's secret, and the murky feelings it created in him. The genius of the character is how these two forces, repressed desire and suppressed trauma, are not separate tracks but are fused together like a bomb. The trauma of his father's secret life creates a rulebook. Desire is dangerous, secrecy is survival. And any deviation from straight, dominant masculinity is a threat to the entire family structure. This rulebook then forces Nate to police his own thoughts and feelings with extreme prejudice. Any flicker of attraction or tenderness that doesn't fit the mold is seen as a catastrophic failure, a step toward becoming his despised father. So, he shoves it down. But shoving down core parts of yourself doesn't make them disappear. It turns them into fuel for anxiety, self-loathing, and paranoia. That internal pressure has to go somewhere, and for Nate, it erupts as external rage. He takes the shame and fear he feels about his own possible desires and the horror of his childhood discovery, and he projects it onto the world with terrifying force. He becomes an abuser because he feels abused by the truth of his own life. He seeks total control over his girlfriends and his environment because his inner world and his family history are realms of utter chaos and lack of control. In the end, trying to diagnose Nate as simply a repressed gay man or simply a traumatized child is a dead end. He is a tragic product of a specific, poisonous environment. He is a mirror held up to the worst consequences of toxic masculinity, a system that tells men they must be one thing and one thing only, and that anything else is worthy of shame and violence. Nate learned that lesson not from vague societal messages, but in the most intimate way possible, from the hidden files on his father's hard drive. His story is a warning about what happens when people are forced to live a lie, and how that lie, passed down through generations, can curdle into brutality. His rage is the language of a self at war, a boy screaming in a man's body, trying to silence the deafening echoes of his father's motel room and the unsettling questions it raised about who he really is. Until he can face both the trauma of that discovery and the complex person it obscured, he will remain a prisoner, and he will continue to make everyone around him prisoners too, in a desperate, violent attempt to prove that the fortress of his masculinity is real, even as he feels it crumbling from the inside out every single day.